Welcome to our first of our Lenten series we're calling Rise Up. I take that name from Isaiah chapter 52, verse 2, that starts off, "Shake yourself from the dust and rise up." We've all had a challenging past year. So my thought is that we would talk to people about things they learned from the last year, but are hopeful about and look forward to bringing into the future. So in other words, what did you learn from last year that you want to bring with you into 2022? Our first speaker is Captain Tim Kinsella. Captain Kinsella is the CO, the commanding officer of NAS Pensacola. He enlisted in the Navy, went to Naval Academy, has had a storied career, and has now come here to lead the base. Besides that, he is a member of Christ Church. His kids go to EDS. His wonderful wife, Jen, is actually on the board over at EDS. And even more than that, I've come to consider him a close friend. My thinking in this series was to ask interesting people to reflect on the last year and how things are moving into the future. So we'll start by hearing from Captain Tim Kinsella.
Thank you, Father Michael. Thanks for calling me interesting, by the way. I hope my kids find me interesting. There's a saying in Ireland that you know you've had a successful life if people are still telling stories about you after you're gone. So thanks. Father Michael asked me to speak on what I've learned over the past year. And Michael has a knack of asking in a way that makes refusal impossible. So much so that if he asked me to dance a jig along Palafox in my underwear, I'd probably do it because he'd do it in a way that made me think it was the right thing to do. So I'd do it because I trust him and because he's a dear friend, and I think the subject is very, very powerful. But this is a tough one for me. I've learned so much over the past year, some of which is very painful, some of which has been enlightening, and some of which has been thankfully joyful. So I called Michael the other day and I asked him if he wanted me to speak as the commander of NAS Pensacola or as Tim Kinsella, a fellow parishioner of Christ Church, a fellow Pensacolan, and a fellow American. So I can only speak of my own personal experience this past year, so that's who I'm going to speak as, just as a fellow parishioner, a fellow Pensacolan, and a fellow American. And I want to speak to you freely. I want to speak to you without judgment, without fear, and with an open heart and mind. So some of the things may touch something within you. It certainly does for me, and I hope it does. It's uncomfortable for me to speak about this, not because of what I've experienced, but because of what we have all experienced. This has been the toughest year for many of us of our life. I just spoke with a close friend the other day who told me that he watched his father die on Zoom. Think about that. He watched his father die on Zoom. How does anything that I can say or feel compare with that experience and with the emotional pain and the growth that comes of it? So please bear with me as I give you my personal account of this past year and what I learned. So my year really began on December 6th of 2019, a day that, to use FDR's words, will certainly live in infamy in my mind. That morning, I woke up as I usually do, and I went over to wake up the kids in the room across the hall, and they wouldn't get out of bed as they normally do, so I went and got my guitar that I play very badly, and I started playing a tune to get them out of bed. Get out of bed, strumming away, and they're yelling at me, and then my phone rings over my bedside table. So I go over and I answer it, and it's my security officer, and he tells me that we have an active shooter in one of our buildings. My world immediately focused into everything that he was saying on the phone to me. He gave me the details, and I put down the phone, and I took a second just to think about exactly what that meant. He said that there was 2 people known down, and that our security were en route to combat the attacker. So my immediate reaction was just to throw on a pair of shorts and run out the door, but I then caught myself and I said, no, I'm going to be in these same clothes all day. I need to shave, I need to look presentable, I'm probably going to be on television. My people are going to be looking at me. I need to look right for them. So I went and shaved, and that was actually a very good thing to do, just getting a quick shave and putting my clothes on, because it slowed things down for me. It allowed my mind that was racing just to take stock of the moment and to see what I really needed to do. So as I walked out the door, And Jen, my wonderful wife, she's with the kids in the kitchen, and they're having breakfast, and I'm racing out the door. And as I go out the door, I realized I hadn't kissed her, and I hadn't kissed my kids. And I didn't know what I was walking into. I didn't know how many people are on base that were shooting. I didn't know how many active shooters there were. It seems unfathomable now, but at the time I didn't know if I was coming back. So I went back in and I kissed Jen, and I kissed both the kids. And Jen said, "What should we do? Should I send the kids to school?" And I said, no, keep them at home, because I didn't want them to go through the questions and the stares and the trauma that they would have at school, just from people wanting to know more. So I said, keep them at home. We don't know what this day is going to bring. So she did. So I went into work. I called the Admiral and told the world what was happening. And at work, we have this place called Emergency Operations Center. It's the bottom of my building. So I went in there, because the worst place that I could go is to the scene, because now all my people are worried about me instead of worrying about the problem at hand. So I went to the Emergency Operations Center and started to run the problem from there. And then eventually I had to go to the scene itself. And my Command Master Chief, Mario Rivers, was with me. He's a native Pensacolian, great man. And he drove me down there. A couple of weeks later, we were talking about it, and I said to him, "Master Chief, where were you that day?" And he said, "Skipper, are you kidding me? I was with you the whole time." And there was so much of that day that I had blocked out. It was just a blur. And I said, "Oh my goodness, of course you were. You were with me the whole time." And he said, "When we were driving to the scene, I looked over at you, and you were staring out the window, and your face was white." And I remembered exactly what he was talking about, because at that moment, I was trying to steel myself for what I knew I was about to see. That I couldn't allow my personal emotions to affect how other people would see me, because I was their commander. I had to put my game face on. I had to put my war face on. Because the confidence that they have, they would derive it from me. And if I'm walking through the scene as a blubbering mess, then what sort of leadership does that show? And that confusion and that lack of confidence in myself would then pervade throughout the entire command. So it was important for me to be the commander that they needed, not what I was feeling on the inside. I needed to be who they needed at that time. And I learned something in that moment. I learned a lot during that time and in the months afterwards, but I learned a lot about leadership. I learned that leadership hurts. It hurts your very bones. It's true leadership in crises. It is like a weight that presses down through your skin onto your very bones, the burden of it. And in that crisis, my personal needs were absolutely secondary to the needs of everybody around me. If anybody tells you that when you're in a crisis that you need to look after yourself, well, then they've never been through a crisis themselves. They've never been in a leadership position in a crisis, because you can't look after yourself. If you're looking after yourself, you're not looking after everybody else. You got to put your head down and you got to barrel through it. You have to. And then afterwards, you worry about how are you going to take care of your personal needs. I also learned about the community and the love that this community has for the base and its people. But the crisis didn't end when the terrorist was shot. That was only the beginning. Then began the investigations, the daily meetings, the attempt to understand the whys and the hows, the visits by the admirals and the generals and the secretaries and the senators, the press events, the reporters asking questions that I didn't have the answers to. Or sitting with the family members and trying to explain to them how such a thing could happen to their child on a military base, on my base, under my watch, answering their unanswerable questions about how we are going to prevent this from happening again. They're questions I still ask myself every day. And then there was the memorials. The Lord knows I've been to a few in my lifetime in uniform. I've been to more memorials for friends than I have fingers and toes. But these were different. Deaths in naval aviation are very sadly an accepted part of life. But tragic deaths such as these at the cradle of naval aviation is not. Memorials are necessary. They are a healing mechanism for the community. But to the people who have been through the trauma, they are profoundly, profoundly difficult. And then a couple of months later, COVID came. COVID was like a reprieve. I felt like my head had been pulled up out of the water to get a breath. No more memorials, no more speeches, no more press events. COVID was like a a soothing balm across a gaping wound because it gave us space. It gave us time to heal, but although it brought peace to some of us, it brought terrible pain and loss to others. Our gathering places became empty, our churches lifeless, our playing fields bare. But we found a way through it. But I learned the need for company, the need for social interaction. I learned again how much the base means to the town and vice versa. I saw a picture recently of a Navy League event, and there was no Navy League personnel, or no Navy personnel at it, but there was an Air Force guy there in his uniform with all my Navy League friends, because they're allowed out in town and we Navy folks aren't. And that made me mad. It really made me mad, because this is a Navy town. What's an Air Force guy doing at a Navy League event when I should be there? I long for the day when I can see my friends' faces and their smiles. But I suppose one good thing is that we've all learned to laugh with our eyes, which isn't a bad thing after all. And then George Floyd was murdered. His death sparked an awakening to recognize the injustice of prejudice and racism and bigotry that has pervaded our society for hundreds of years. To finally come to terms with America's original sin, and we have a long way to go yet. I learned something then. I learned that we have to each see each other not as black or white or brown or yellow, but as fellow human beings with the same needs, wants, and desires. If you walk into a convenience store and see a black man, correct yourself and instead see a human. See a fellow Pensacolian. See a fellow American with the same hopes, dreams, and aspirations as yourself that are guaranteed under our Constitution. And then we lost Vinny. Vinny was a dear friend, but I was at odds at Vinny when he died. He was the commanding officer of Aviation Schools Command, where the shooting happened, and those events brought us very close together out of necessity. A few weeks after the shooting, I saw Vinny at the officers' club. He grabbed me by the elbow and he said, "Lucky," that's my call sign, my nickname, Lucky. He said, "Lucky, I'm glad it was you. I'm glad it was you that led us through this. I'm glad it was me and you." I felt that we shared a deep, unspoken bond born out of the profound burden we were sharing. When I last saw him, I was mad at him, and he knew it, for a reason that doesn't matter, and it was kind of a stupid reason. We still smiled at each other because we both had a respect for each other. And about a week after seeing him that last time, my phone rang one evening, and I saw that it was a pretty senior person on the base. And he told me that Vinny had been flying in a civilian plane, and he was missing, feared lost. I was the first person he called, so I had to put my personal feelings aside and get into business mode and find out what happened. His plane had been reported missing. Himself and his co-pilot, another member of Vinny's command, Witz Fuller, were lost, both with beautiful families. I still haven't really come to the terms with the fact that he's gone. I learned from Vinny the importance of grace. He was wonderful with the families of the victims. He was so compassionate. He was kind with them. He was kind to a fault, if there is such a thing. And it's just a small thing, but his beautiful wife, Alyssa, she needed a uniform hat to place with him in the casket. So now Vinny is lying in Barrancas National Cemetery with my favorite dress hat that I bought at Johnson's on the Avenue just outside the Naval Academy gates in Annapolis many years ago. My hat lying with him gives me a little bit of solace, I guess. It's my way of saying that I was sorry I never got to tell you, Vinny, why I was mad at you. So thank you, Vinny, for teaching me the worth of unmerited mercy, of the profound necessity for grace. Not long after the shock of Vinny's death came Sally. The hits kept coming. And Sally was a shock to us all, to everybody in this town. We weren't expecting it. We thought it would just spin off to the north. Myself, Jen, and the kids went to bed that night, and we woke up to the noise of a freight train careening over our house like many of you did. The bed was shaking for all the wrong reasons. Jen and myself went into damage control mode, boarding up broken windows, shoring up doors, and stemming the tide of water flowing through the doors, windows, and down the walls of our 120-year-old house. When I could finally get out of the house to get to my office down the road the next morning, The devastation made my heart sink. I was heartbroken to see my base brought to its knees. It was like seeing a dear friend battered, bruised, and broken. I knew the entire town was suffering just as much, yet people still came to work on base despite their homes ruined, holes in their roof, black mold creeping up the walls, and smashed cars and trees in their living rooms. Within 24 hours after storm passage, they had the base up and running, albeit a pretty fragile up and running, but up and running nonetheless. I was so proud to be part of that team, and I learned something then. I learned the immense goodness in people's hearts, the power of believing in something bigger than yourself, the incredible ability of people to give everything when they believe it is for the greater good. We expect our men and women in uniform to show up in a crisis, but it was our civilian workers that really floored me. People with roofs torn off and displaced families, they all came to work the next day. I'll never forget that. And then a few months later, the Capitol riots. My greatest fear is to see our military pitted against our citizens in the streets of America. And we saw that this past year. It chilled me to the bone. The thought of it still chills me to the bone. It's not normal. It's not acceptable. It is indicative of a nation rent apart without trust, without compassion, without grace. Imagine that you were one of those soldiers, asked to stand against your fellow citizen. It rips the very fabric of our society asunder. Not since 1812 has the Capitol been desecrated as it was on January 6th. When political opinion becomes more important than the truth, this is the result. When opinion becomes more important than the truth, we dissolve into tribes instead of community. Tribes focus on our differences. Community focuses on our commonalities. It is our common desire for good and the pursuit of happiness that unites us. I have learned that we have to refocus on the unifying powers that have always made us great. Reject the falsehoods that divide us. Dissension of opinion is good and it's healthy, but we must recognize them for what they are. Opinions give us our individualism, but our common values based on human rights and embedded in the Constitution, this is what unites us as Americans. The greatest casualty of this past year, out of all that has happened, is truth. I saw it after the terrorist attack at the base. I see it during the pandemic. I saw it after my friend Vinny lost his life. I saw it in the response to the hurricane. I saw it in the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent protests. I saw the truth smothered and buried by both sides before, during, and after the assault on the Capitol. It makes me mad and it makes me sad that we have come to this. In all our suffering, in all our compassion, in all the goodness that Americans are capable of, we continue to choose selfish righteousness over respect for truth and love. As I grew up in Ireland, my father would tell me every day how lucky I was to be born American, that nobody could take it away from me, that it was my right to be free. God help us, but our greatest threat isn't from the Chinese or the Russians. It is from ourselves. I truly believe, as Ronald Reagan famously said, that America is a shining city upon a hill. Not because of who we are, but because of who we aspire to be. The theme of these discussions is from Isaiah 52:2. Rise from the dust, O Jerusalem. Sit in a place of honor. Remove the chains of slavery from your neck. How apt. Our altruistic ideals propel us to sit in a place of honor, but our chains of slavery are not made of iron. They are made of falsehoods fabricated for gain. Only by embracing the truth in all aspects of our lives will it set us free to become the people we are destined to be. A little further in Isaiah is Isaiah 52:7. It's a passage I really love. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings. So after all the horror of this past year, there is good news. It is good news born of trial and tribulations. Look into your heart and ask yourself what is missing. What is missing in your heart? What do you yearn for the most? I dare say it is company, fellowship, the simple enjoyment of sitting with your friends at dinner, of traveling unfettered by worry to see your loved ones. Laughter, hugs, smiles without a mask. I have learned that we need each other. I have learned whatever our difference is, our need for each other trumps it. I have learned that true love, truth, compassion, and grace are more important now than they have ever been in our lifetime. I have learned that each and every one of us has a part to play. That if we don't embrace love when we are afraid, if we don't embrace grace when we are judgmental, compassion instead of intolerance, and if we don't seek the truth when we are lost, we are destined to live in a lonely wilderness of anger and confusion. I have learned that the prejudice and selfish partisanship are un-American, that our greatest strength is each other. I've learned that our greatest strength is love. Thank you.
I often speak at funerals where a family member will go first, and then I will stand up to say some great things or wise things. And sometimes they do such a good job, I just want to stand up and say amen to everything they just said. And so to you, Tim, I would say amen to everything you said. The wisdom and clarity of which you looked at the past year and also looked at it into the future. Now I'm going to tell them something I've told you several times, but I believe that God has called you to the particular role at this particular time. While we have had very good COs at NAS, I believe that God called you to bear this burden and to be a leader at that place as you face all the things you mentioned, as you face the shooting on the base, the hurricane, COVID, racial unrest, all of it. Can you speak any to what in your past or your history kind of prepared you or led you to this moment?
As I think all of us face when we're younger and going through life, what are we doing? Where are we going? Where is life going to take us? I think when it's all over, are we going to say that we led a life well lived, a full life? I feel at this point, more so than any other time in my life, that everything I have done in my life has led me to here. It's led me to this place, to this point in time, and I feel blessed to be here. Everything from my first command tour to teach me what leadership is really about. Even being in Belgium, the cultural differences with all of the other officers that I had to work with, and the hours spent banging my head against the wall and learning how not to hurt my head as I'm banging it against the wall, has been helpful. My love of history to give me a perspective on how leaders have gone through crises in the past. Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill are two great heroes of mine. They're all their faults and foibles together, but how they rose to the occasions during crises of such great import for their countries. That taught me that in a time of crisis, you really do have to put yourself second. It's all about the people around you. You worry about yourself later on. Where I went to school to teach me, it was a Christian school, it was a Church of Ireland Protestant school, but it taught me so much about grace, about camaraderie, about growing up in a pub. My folks owned a pub and we lived upstairs from. That's where I feel I really got to know people. I got to understand people and people for who they are, to their weaknesses, their strengths, and how to talk to folks. So I really feel that everything now has just led me to this point.
Another phrase you used is that you said the hits just keep coming. And you really have for the last, 14, 15 months. It seems like y'all have gone from one challenge to another. How do you find perseverance and strength for that? Because I encounter that a lot with people. My question for God someday is not why do bad things happen to good people. It's why does some people just seem to keep getting hit over and over again. They seem to recover and then life just hits them again. Yeah. So speak to perseverance, the ability to get through things.
You have to take your strength from somewhere, right? So you can't go through difficult things as an empty vessel. You need you have to draw your source of strength from somewhere, and I draw it from several places that I think I've always done, but now I've been able to hone in on what those things were. The first is my family. My family is my North Star. That's my guiding light that guide me ethically, to always be the husband and the father that my family needs. Not the husband and father that I want to be, but the one that they need. Secondly is the people around me. And again, it's being the leader that they need. And when I see the strength in them, those people that came into work after the hurricane, when their lives have been ripped asunder, how could I not be the leader that they needed after seeing what they're going through? I owe it to them. And I do. I take a lot of strength from people who have been through much worse than I have. I just spoke about Lincoln and the years of his presidency and the immense burden that he felt trying to keep the Union together. That's unimaginable to me. So what I'm going through, it's my job. It's what I got to do. It's what I got to do for the people around me.
Yeah. Another thing you said that really struck a nerve with me was that leadership hurts. I oftentimes tell people that leadership is lonely, that there's a perspective you have that you have to deal with. And so you have served under lots of leaders in different roles, and then you still do now. Like you have chain of command up and down. What is one thing you look for in a leader? What is one quality in somebody when you've followed somebody that you look for in that leader?
Authenticity. Because that authenticity, if you have a leader who isn't authentic, then that means that they're doing things for reasons other than the best interests of the command or the organization or whatever it is. At least if it's a bad leader and they're authentic, you know where you stand. If they're a good leader and they're authentic, there's so many things like that go with that, but it's a good starting point, that authenticity. We have a saying in the Navy, before guys go take command for the first time, they always say, be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else, because that somebody else is already taken up by somebody else.
Right.
Right? There's only one of you.
Right.
What got you to that point is who you need to be.
Right.
And that authenticity, you would hope with that authenticity, then comes the vulnerability, the love, to see your work through the prism of love. And it's not a Romeo and Juliet love. It's a love that brings all the things like grace, compassion. It's an altruistic feeling that you're doing things not for yourself, but for the betterment of the organization and the people around you. I failed to mention and here I am in the house of God, and I failed to mention faith. I am terribly guilty of becoming, the times when I'm closest to God is when I'm in the most pain. And I had a revelation, a personal revelation during this. And I was in a kind of a dark place. And I was talking to my chaplain on base. And we were talking about Christ suffering on the cross. And it just dawned on me. I mean, it's something we talk about Christ and we talk about his suffering and how he died for us, but I never truly understood it. Because when you're suffering, you need to be able to look to somebody who's been through something worse than you have.
Yeah.
To give you inspiration. And his suffering on the cross, it all of a sudden I understood it. And it gave me such peace. I kind of renewed my relationship with God when I got married, because I felt like a hypocrite standing in front of the altar if I wasn't doing it from the heart.
Yeah.
So since then, I've been building on that relationship as best I can with the help of my beautiful wife and people like you, Padre. But this past year, I think has really brought me closer.
Yeah. Well, I'll end on that note, right? That can be a source of strength for people in the midst of that. Now, for those of you who are joining us on the Zoom call, then we'll have time for your questions now. And those of you who saw this as an independent video, thank you for watching. And we'll continue this once a week with key and interesting people who can speak to us a little bit about their past year and look towards the future. Thank you.